Hi, I'm Tanya Garnett, and I'd like to share my story with you. When people look at me now, they see strength, they see confidence, they see someone who has it together. But they don't always see the road that it took to get here. And my story, it didn't start with confidence, it started with survival. As a child, I experienced sexual abuse, and later I was raped. And these experiences deeply distorted how I saw myself, how I understood love, and how I related to men. So early on, I learned that my body had value, but I didn't. At least that's how it felt. And I took that belief on into adulthood, and it resulted in me filling my life with promiscuity and broken boundaries and relationships that were rooted in pain instead of safety. For a long time, I lived in survival mode. I learned early how to push through the pain without really dealing with it. I learned how to keep going, how to perform, how to look okay on the outside, but on the inside, I was carrying a lot. And my journey, it's held many successes, but it's also held an equal amount of self-sabotage. I didn't understand what I was going through mentally, emotionally, so I coped the only way I knew how. I struggled with trauma, identity, and coping in ways that eventually led me down a path I thought I'd never walk. Alcohol became a way to escape reality, and it worked for a while until it didn't. Then prescription opioids entered the picture. Eventually, crack cocaine took over my life completely. See, what I know is addiction takes more than it gives. In my life, it became chaotic and dangerous. I was shot while I was in the streets, and I experienced where my life nearly was lost. I went through undiagnosed mental health crises. I really didn't understand what was happening, and I gave up. I attempted suicide multiple times. And at the same time, I was also receiving spiritual guidance, but it confused me more than it helped me. And honestly, I was dealing with loss and grieving deeply, especially after the devastating loss of my daughter. And I didn't know how to sit with that kind of pain. So I kept running. And that running led me through multiple incarcerations. And each time I told myself the same thing. If I can just get out, things will be different. But they weren't. Now, the real turning point came during my last incarceration, and it came in a way I didn't expect. For the first time, I stopped asking God to get me out of jail. And I said, God, just change me. Change me while I'm here. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I can't keep doing this. And that was a moment of surrender. And I finally understood grace, that it was something that I didn't have to earn. It was freely given. And love, it had meaning, because now I met a love that I didn't have to earn. I didn't have to pretend to get it. I didn't have to perform. It was there, and it met me in the middle of my mess. But listen, surrender didn't mean avoiding responsibility. It meant facing it. That's when I began to look inward. I stopped rehashing everything that had happened to me, not because it didn't matter, but because I was ready to examine what I'd done with it. I learned to forgive others. And just as importantly, I learned how to forgive myself. I began to take an honest look at my choices, my patterns, and the habits that had grown out of survival mode. I realized that I'd been living behind masks, living in secrets, and I never allowed anyone to see my true self. Now, healing required tools. It required, some people say, well, you could just will your way through this and if you just commit to it. But listen, I needed actual tools to help me through this. So I learned to ask for help, even when it was uncomfortable. I learned how to sit with my emotions instead of running from them. I used therapy, structure, accountability. I journaled. I renewed my faith. And I secured relationships with the right people. People that believed in me. People that would lift me up, not tear me down. And most importantly, I learned that while I'm responsible for my own healing, I don't have to do it alone. And what was birthed from that process was courage. The courage to tell my story openly so that others could see that even in the darkest places, hope exists. That shame does not get the final word. That our stories become tools for healing rather than the chains that bind us. And as I healed, advocacy naturally followed. I began standing up for others who had been impacted by the criminal justice system. People whose stories are often reduced to charges instead of humanity. And today, my life looks very different. I experience joy, real joy. I've rebuilt trust. I have a meaning in my life. I've found a meaning through serving others, especially those who feel forgotten, judged, or stuck where I once was. My story now has purpose, not because of what I went through, but because of what I chose to do with it. I'm a mother who shows up. I'm a woman who uses her voice. I'm someone who walks in recovery, not in perfection. And my dreams, they're big. I dream of continuing to tell my story so that others know they're not alone. I dream of breaking cycles, not just for myself, but for generations after me. I dream of impact, of freedom, of healing for individuals, for families, for communities. And listen, if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's that your past does not disqualify you. Your pain does not define you. And real recovery, it is possible. I'm proof that you can survive, heal, and build a life filled with meaning and purpose. Thank you for allowing me to share my story.